Harry will be back up front again, this time as the speaker, and we will set the stopwatch. Harry needs no introduction. He's the button guy, as well as the person who talks to Fred, not my husband. Anyway, his title, I'm Certain, Oh Really? A Message to the 21st Century. So, Harry?
The first time I spoke here, I went over by about 30 minutes, and several people commented on this. So I would like to avoid that this time if I can. All right. Every year, a bunch of books are published called The Best. This is the best American essays of 2015. There are the best American short stories, there's the best science fiction, so forth. And so this is the 2015 edition, which contains things from 2014. And the criteria is that it has to be published within the prior 12 months to the publication. And each year they have a different editor who picks what articles go in, and they have a senior editor who picks the editors. So this year I got the copy of my friend Andy in California, and I read the essays. And I picked it up and began to read the essays and determined that whoever the this year's essay picker is not tuned to my interest a lot. But I happened to hit this essay, and I really liked it and didn't know what to do with it. And I thought, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll volunteer to read it to you and then talk about it. The good thing is that after I read it, I'm going to go through it again and discuss it, and fortunately that doesn't have a particular ending, so I can stop any time. So that's good. I can watch the clock, and if once I get over enough to be annoying, I'll stop, maybe sooner. So I'm going to start by reading the essay, then I'm going to read you about the writer, and then I'm going to give you my comments. A Message to the 21st Century by Isaiah Berlin. It was just published last year. That's why it's eligible for this. That talk was actually given a while back. 20 years ago, on November 25th, 1994, Isaiah Berlin accepted the honorary degree of Doctor of Laws at the University of Toronto. He prepared the following short credo, as he called it in a letter to a friend, for the ceremony, at which it was read on his behalf. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. With these words, Dickens began his famous novel, A Tale of Two Cities. But this cannot, alas, be said about our own terrible century. Men have for millennia destroyed each other, but the deeds of Attila the Hun, Genghis Khan, Napoleon, who introduced mass killings in war, and even the Armenian massacres pale in insignificance before the Russian Revolution and its aftermath. The oppression, torture, murder which accumulated at the doors of Lenin, Stalin, Hitler, Mao, Pol Pot, and the systematic falsification of information which prevented knowledge of these horrors for years. These are unparalleled. They were not natural disasters, but preventable human crimes. And whatever those who believe in historical determinism may think, they could have been averted. I speak with particular feeling, for I am a very old man. I have lived through almost the entire century. My life has been peaceful and secure, and I feel almost ashamed of this in view of what has happened to so many other human beings. I am not a historian, and so I cannot speak with authority on the causes of these horrors. Yet perhaps I can try. They were, in my view, not caused by the ordinary negative human sentiments, as Spinoza called them: fear, greed, tribal hatreds, jealousy, love of power, though, of course, these have played their wicked part. They have been caused in our time by ideas, or rather by one particular idea. It is paradoxical that Karl Marx, who played down the importance of ideas in comparison with impersonal social and economic forces, should, by his writing, have caused the transformation of the 20th century, both in the direction of what he wanted and by reaction against it. The German poet Heine, in one of his most famous writings, told us not to underestimate the quiet philosopher sitting in his study. If Kant had not undone theology, he declared, Robespierre might not have cut off the head of the King of France. He predicted that the armed disciples of the German philosophers, Fichte, Schelling, and the other fathers of German nationalism, would one day destroy the great momentum of Western Europe in a wave of fanatical destruction before which the French Revolution would seem child's play. This may have been unfair to the German metaphysician, yet Heine's central idea seems to me valid in a debased form. In a debased form, the Nazi ideology did not have roots in German enlightenment. In debased form, the Nazi ideology did have roots in German anti-Enlightenment thought. There are men who will kill and maim with a tranquil conscience under the influence of words and writings of some of those who are certain they know perfection can be reached. Let me explain. If you are truly convinced that there is some solution to all human problems, that one can conceive an ideal society which men can reach only if they do what is necessary to attain it, then you and your followers must believe that no price can be too high to pay in order to open the gates of such a paradise. Only the stupid and malevolent will resist once certain simple truths are put to them. Those who resist must be persuaded. If they cannot be persuaded, laws must be passed to restrain them. If that does not work, then coercion, if need be violence, will inevitably have to be used, if necessary, terror and slaughter. Lenin believed this after reading Das Kapital, and consistently taught that if a just, peaceful, happy, free, virtuous society could be created by the means he advocated, then the end justified any methods that needed to be used, literally any. The root conviction which underlies this is that the central questions of human life, individual or social, have one true answer which can be discovered. It can and must be implemented, and those who have found it are the leaders whose word is law. The idea that to all genuine questions there can only be one true answer is a very old philosophical notion. The great Athenian philosophers, Jews and Christians, the thinkers of the Renaissance, and the Paris of Louis XIV, the French radical reformers of the 18th century, the revolutionaries of the 19th, however much they differed about what the answer was or how to discover it, and bloody wars were fought over this, were all convinced that they knew the answer and that only human vice and stupidity could obstruct its realization. This is the idea of which I spoke, and what I wish to tell you is that it is false. Not only because the solutions given by different schools of social thought differ, and none can be demonstrated by rational methods, but for an even deeper reason. The central values by which most men have lived in a great many lands and a great many times, these values, almost, if not entirely universal, are not always harmonious with each other. Some are not. Men have always craved liberty, security, equality, happiness, justice, knowledge, and so on. But complete liberty is not compatible with complete equality. If men were wholly free, the wolves would be free to eat the sheep. Perfect equality means that human liberties must be restrained so that the ablest and most gifted are not permitted to advance beyond those who would inevitably lose if there were competition. Security, and indeed freedom, cannot be preserved if freedom to subvert them is permitted. Indeed, not everyone seeks security or peace. Otherwise, some would not have sought glory in battle or in dangerous sports. Justice has always been a human ideal, but it is not fully compatible with mercy. Creative imagination and spontaneity, splendid in themselves, cannot be fully reconciled with the need for planning, organization, careful and responsible calculation. Knowledge, the pursuit of truth, the noblest of aims, cannot be fully reconciled with the happiness or the freedom that men desire. For even I know that I have some incurable disease. Even if I know that I have some incurable disease, this will not make me happier or freer. I must always choose between peace and excitement, or knowledge and blissful ignorance, and so on. So what is to be done to restrain the champions, sometimes very fanatical, of one or the other of these values, each of whom tends to trample upon the rest, as the great tyrants of the 20th century have trampled on the life, liberty, and human rights of millions, because their eyes were fixed upon some ultimate golden future? I am afraid I have no dramatic answer to offer, only that if these ultimate human values by which we live are to be pursued, then compromises, trade-offs, arrangements have to be made if the worst is not to happen. So much liberty for so much equality, so much individual self-expression for so much security, so much justice for so much compassion. My point is that some values clash. The ends pursued by human beings are all generated by our common nature, but their pursuit has to be, to some degree, controlled. Liberty and the pursuit of happiness, I repeat, may not be fully compatible with each other, nor are liberty, equality, and fraternity. So we must weigh and measure, bargain, compromise, and prevent the crushing of one form of life by its rivals. I know only too well that this is not a flag under which idealistic and enthusiastic young men and women may wish to march. It seems too tame, too reasonable, too bourgeois. It does not engage the generous emotions. But you must believe me, one cannot have everything one wants, not only in practice but even in theory. The denial of this, the search for a single overarching ideal because it is the one and only true one for humanity, invariably leads to coercion, and then to destruction, blood. Eggs are broken, but the omelet is not in sight. There is only an infinite number of eggs, human lives, ready for the breaking. And in the end, the passionate idealists forget the omelet and just go on breaking eggs. I am glad to note that toward the end of my long life, some realization of this is beginning to dawn. Rationality, tolerance, rare enough in human history, are not despised. Liberal democracy, despite everything, despite the greatest modern scourge of fanatical fundamentalist nationalism, is spreading. Great tyrannies are in ruins, or will be. Even in China, the day is not too distant. I am glad that you to whom I speak will see the 21st century, which I feel sure can only be a better time for mankind than my terrible century has been. I congratulate you on your good fortune. I regret that I shall not see this brighter future, which I am convinced is coming. With all the gloom that I have been spreading, I am glad to end on an optimistic note. There really are good reasons to think that it is justified. So that's the complete essay. I'm going to tell you about the author. Sir Isaiah Berlin was born in 1909 and died in 1997 at the age of 88. He was a Russo-British Jewish social and political theorist, philosopher, and historian of ideas, thought by many to be the dominant scholar of his generation. He excelled as an essayist, conversationalist, and raconteur, and as a brilliant lecturer who improvised rapidly and spontaneously, richly elusive and coherently structured material. He was born in Russia. When he was 11, his family moved to England because of an increasingly oppressed life under Bolshevik rule and anti-Semitism. Berlin's English was virtually non-existent at first, but he became fluent within a year. Berlin was educated at St. Paul's School in London, then at Corpus Christi College, Oxford, where he studied the greats, the classics. In his final examination, he took a first, winning the John Locke Prize for his performance in the philosophy papers, in which he outscored A.J. Ayer, a very famous logician. Berlin was to remain at Oxford for the rest of his life, apart from a period working for British information services in New York from 1940 to 42, and for the British embassies in Washington, D.C. and Moscow from then until 1946. Berlin was fluent in Russian and English, spoke French, German, and Italian, and knew Latin and ancient Greek. In its obituary of the scholar, The Independent stated that Isaiah Berlin was often described, especially in his old age, by means of superlatives, the world's greatest talker, the century's most inspired reader, one of the finest minds of our time. There is no doubt that he showed in more than one direction the unexpectedly large possibilities open to us at the top end of the range of human potential. That obituary also stated he was a man of formidable intellectual power with a rare gift for understanding a wide range of human motives, hopes, and fears, and a prodigiously energetic capacity for enjoyment of life, of people in all their variety, of their ideas and idiosyncrasies, of literature, of music, of art. The front page of the New York Times concluded, his was an exuberant life, crowded with joys, the joy of thought, the joy of music, the joy of good friends. The theme that runs throughout his work is his concern with liberty and the dignity of human beings. Sir Isaiah radiated well-being. So this was the man who wrote this essay. And now as time ticks by, I will begin my comments, which fortunately I can end at any point. Because the main message is there. I wanted you to hear that essay. I found that a powerful statement. Of course, it's just one man's point of view, and brilliant as he is, it's just how he sees it. But I found it really interesting, and I had not seen things from that perspective before. I'm now going to read the essay again, adding in my comments and emphasis. My goal is to communicate what I found so interesting and important in this essay, and to share with you some of the thoughts it evoked in me. The repetition of an author's words has disadvantages. I will be using it a bit, both to emphasize certain points and to resume the thread of thought after I've interrupted for my comments. So the opening thing is about it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, and how the people like Lenin, Stalin, Hitler, Mao, Pol Pot dwarfed the cruelty and murder of prior history, making all the prior seem insignificant. I speak with particular feeling, for I am a very old man and I have lived through most of the entire century. He was born in 1909. He was 85 at the time he gave this talk, and he died in 1997. My life has been peaceful and secure, he said. That's true for most of us in this room. We have been lucky and perhaps blessed in this. The same cannot be said for a large portion of the 6 billion souls who are alive with us today. My life has been peaceful and secure, and I feel almost ashamed of this in view of what has happened to so many other human beings. I am not a historian, and so I cannot speak with the authority and the cause of these horrors, yet perhaps I can try. I had the idea that there's no flat surface here, that when I was reading the author, I would put this guy up, and when I was speaking, I'd put this guy up, sort of like Fred and Maxine. But I think you'll probably be able to distinguish my comments from his. So he says he can try to talk about the causes. They were, in my views, not caused by ordinary negative human sentiments, as Spinoza called them: fear, greed, tribal hatreds, jealousy, love of power, though of course these have played their wicked parts. Consider this list: fear, greed, tribal hatreds, jealousy, love of power. What are the things that we could add to this list of historical causes of these horrors? Love, lust, vengeance, misunderstanding, religion. Still, Spinoza's list covers a lot of ground. Fear, greed, tribal hatreds, jealousy, love of power catches a pretty wide spectrum. He says they were not caused by, in my view, not caused by the ordinary negative human sentiments, fear, greed. They have been caused in our time by ideas, or rather by one particular idea. And he goes on to describe that idea. He says later on, there are men who will kill and maim with a tranquil conscience under the influence of the words and writings of some of those who are certain they know perfection can be reached. I think this is one of the more important insights in this essay. Note the tranquil conscience in this quote. There are men who will kill and maim with a tranquil conscience. Note also the reference to those who are certain they know perfection can be reached. He goes on to say, let me explain, if you are truly convinced that there is some solution to all human problems, that one can conceive an ideal society which men can reach if they only do what is necessary to attain it, then you and your followers must believe that no price can be too high in order to open the gates of such a paradise. Here again is that insight. I read this to say that those who are certain they see a clear path to the ideal society are willing to pay any price to achieve that end. He goes on to say, only the stupid and malevolent will resist such an idea. Those who resist must be persuaded. If they cannot be persuaded, laws must be passed to restrain them. If that does not work, then coercion, if need be, violence, will inevitably have to be used. If necessary, terror and slaughter. Lenin believed this after reading Das Kapital, and consistently taught that if a just, peaceful, happy, free, virtuous society could be created by the means he advocated, then the end justified any method that needed to be used, literally any. He's saying that those who must resist must be persuaded. If you are certain of your view, then the end justifies the means, no matter how inhumane that means. The root conviction which underlies this is that the central questions of human life, individual or social, have one true answer which can be discovered. He says some people are convinced of this. He says that statement is not true. After reading this essay, my view is that it is false for at least two reasons. One is that even if there is a good answer to these questions, it is likely there are more than one good answer. And second, it seems to me that even the best answers have a limited life. So, Isaiah tells us some people become convinced that the central question of human life, individual or social, have one true answer which can be discovered. This is the idea of which I spoke, and what I wish to tell you is that it is false. Not only the solutions given by different schools of social thought differ, and none can be demonstrated by rational methods, but for an even deeper reason. To be honest, I had a little trouble discerning what Isaiah thinks the deeper reason is. My best guess is that he's telling us that the deeper reason is that any system must make difficult compromises, and there's no way to determine exactly how those compromises should be made. How much of one value to give up for another? If there is no way to answer this question, then there is no way to determine the best system. As I read the rest of this essay, see if you can discern what he thinks is the deeper reason. I'll repeat the passage where he tells us. So Isaiah tells us some people become convinced that the central questions of human life, individual or social, have one true answer which can be discovered. This is the idea of which I spoke, and what I wish to tell you is it is false. Not only because the solutions given by different schools of social thought differ, and none can be demonstrated by rational methods, but for an even deeper reason. And I don't know what that is. The central values by which most men have lived in a great many lands and a great many times, these values, almost if not entirely universal, are not always harmonious with each other. Some are not. Men have always craved liberty, security, equality, happiness, justice, knowledge, and so on. Interesting list. What would you add? Liberty, security, equality, happiness. I thought about that for a while. But complete liberty is not compatible with complete equality. And he goes on to talk about this. My understanding is that he's pointing out the central values in the list: liberty, security, equality, happiness, justice, knowledge, and some are such that some are in conflict with others. His examples include: complete liberty is not compatible with complete equality. If men were wholly free, the wolves will be free to eat the sheep. Security and indeed freedom cannot be preserved if freedom to subvert them is permitted. The ideal society that we think of democracy, where people can vote for anything except to take away their right to vote for anything. So there are limits. Creative imagination and spontaneity, splendid in themselves, cannot be fully reconciled with the need for planning, organization, careful and responsible calculation. I might add, I live in a chaotic world where those two things are constantly in conflict. And sometimes the creative imagination and spontaneity wins when it shouldn't. So what is to be done to restrain the champions? He says they're not fully compatible. It occurs to me the major ways that societies have been structured in history, their political structure, their governments, their social values, their religions, are the result of different weightings of the central values on the list. Gun control comes to mind. How much freedom does a society give up in order to have more security? Each social structure represents a particular set of compromises. Communism, dictatorships, democracy, and so on. Each represent a different set of compromises. And each particular example of those systems differs from the others with the same name due to the fine-tuning. Communist systems differ, as do democracies, different settings. By the way, note how my discussion differs from Isaiah's. I greatly admire his brevity. He's able to say in a paragraph, a sentence, what it would take me pages. So he goes on, we must weigh and measure and compromise. I know only too well that this is not, here's the part where I thought very interesting. We must weigh and measure, bargain, compromise, and prevent the crushing of one form of life by its rivals. I know only too well this is not a flag under which idealistic and enthusiastic young men and women may wish to march. It seems too tame, too reasonable, too bourgeois. It does not engage the generous emotions. So that statement rang for me. One of the appeals of ISIS is that it does indeed have a flag under which idealistic and enthusiastic young men and women may wish to march. It does engage what he called the generous emotions. I think that many people, especially young people, want a cause to fight for, something greater than themselves that they are willing to die for. So we must weigh, Isaiah's statement that what we need to pursue is this: we must weigh, measure, bargain, compromise, and prevent the crushing of one form of life for another. As he says, this statement does not have the sizzle to draw and hold the commitment found in ISIS, nor in our own military. It seems to me in my lifetime, the closest we have come to something like this was the Peace Corps. However, even that was tainted with the view that we could use it to convince others that democracy was the best possible political system. Another part of what we just read struck me as particularly well said, and I want to repeat it. I'm getting near the end, by the way. The search for a single overarching ideal, because it is the one and only true one for humanity, invariably leads to coercion and then to destruction, blood. Eggs are broken, but the omelet is not in sight. There is only an infinite number of eggs, human lives, ready for the breaking. And in the end, the passionate idealists forget the omelet and just go on breaking eggs. I note that he says there is only an infinite number of eggs, human lives, ready for the breaking. I beg to differ. There are a finite number of eggs, human lives, ready for the breaking. I am concerned that mankind may someday break all the eggs and become extinct. However, that's a different issue. His main point in the egg paragraph is that, and in the end, the passionate idealists forget the omelet and just go on breaking eggs. Now, this is the end of the essay and the end of my comments. I am glad to note that toward the end of my long life, some realization of this is beginning to dawn. Rationality, tolerance, rare enough in human history, are not despised. Liberal democracy, despite everything, despite the greatest modern scourge of fanatical, fundamentalist nationalism, is spreading. Great tyrannies are in ruins, or will be. Even in China, the day is not too distant. I am glad that you, to whom I speak, will see the 21st century, which I feel sure can only be a better time for mankind than my terrible century has been. Isaiah died in 1997. He did not see the 21st century. We did. I want to read the above paragraph again, and as I read it, ask yourself, has the first 15 years of this century justified his optimism? I am glad to note that toward the end of my long life, some realization of this is beginning to dawn. Rationality, tolerance, rare enough in human history, are not despised. Liberal democracy, despite everything, despite the greatest modern scourge of fanatical fundamentalist nationalism, is spreading. Great tyrannies are in ruins, or will be. Even in China, the day is not too distant. I am glad that you, to whom I speak, will see the 21st century, which I feel sure can only be a better time for mankind than my terrible century has been. I am glad to note toward the end of my long life some realization of this is beginning to dawn. Well, he thinks it's getting better. It will get better. I'm sorry to say I think not. A better day may still await us, but I don't think it's here yet. And his final paragraph is, I congratulate you on your good fortune. I regret that I shall not see this brighter future, which I am convinced is coming. With all the gloom that I have been spreading, I am glad to end on an optimistic note. There really are good reasons to think it's justified. So those are his comments and mine.